Nice to see everyone. My name's Beth Keene. I'm CEO of Holocaust Museum LA, and we're thrilled to host Rabbi Moshe Cohn, who has been presenting a variety of topics all week at the museum and some other places. And today, as you know, he will be speaking on Antisemitism Today. So thank you to Yad Vashem for partnering with us. Anti-Semitism has been rising at alarming rates in recent years around the globe. The Anti-Defamation League's audit revealed a 34% increase in anti-Semitic incidents nationwide in 2021, averaging 7 anti-Semitic incidents every day. Through our museum's close partnership with the ADL, we've learned that ADL will soon report that these staggering statistics continue to climb just in the last year. Systematic anti-Semitism, racism, and hate rhetoric is getting further entrenched into our current climate of political divide and public discourse. In just the last several months, we've had a former president, celebrities, sports figures, overtly stereotype American Jews voice a desire to commit violence and spread conspiracy theories. Survivors in our community are frightened by how the spread of misinformation and anti-Semitic tropes mirrors Germany in the 1930s and the events leading to the Holocaust. Just last month, our local community was unsettled by the news of 2 visibly Jewish men shot as they were leaving synagogues in the Pico-Robertson area, targeted simply because of their Jewish identity. Clearly, our work has become more critical than ever. Holocaust Museum LA is at the forefront of teaching students and the public the critical lessons and continued social relevance of the Holocaust, empowering visitors to stand up and speak out against hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism. I see a lot of familiar faces, but for those of you who are new to Holocaust Museum LA, just wanted to share that a little bit about our mission and how we got started. We're actually the oldest Holocaust Museum in the United States. We were founded by Holocaust survivors in 1961 who met at Hollywood High School, and they realized that each of them had a photographed document or some kind of special belonging from before, during, or after the war. And they wanted to create a safe space where they could remember family members who had perished, display these precious artifacts, and to start educating young people. So think about that. They started telling their stories in the early 1960s, decades before the museum in DC, before the Shoah Foundation got started. So think about the ripple effect that their stories have had on generations of students. So we're proud, at Holocaust Museum LA, we know that we are making an impact on students. And we like to say, if they enter our museum as bystanders, then for sure they exit as upstanders. And that is something that is so important in changing student behaviors. I don't know if you guys saw when you first entered the museum, you may have seen a video of our expansion plans. So since this museum opened in 2010, we've welcomed over 600,000 visitors. And right before COVID, we started experiencing space constraints and sadly were forced to turn away schools. So we embarked on a capital campaign many of you know about to expand the museum. We're going to be doubling our footprint. It's going to be called the Jonah Goldrich Campus, which we're really excited about, and I'd be happy to share our vision for our future if you guys are interested in hearing about more. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Moshe Cohn. Rabbi Moshe Cohn is head of the Jewish World Section, International Seminars and Jewish World Department, an international school for Holocaust Studies at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. So thank you, Rabbi Cohn.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you very much for coming, and let me begin by thanking all the wonderful people here at the LA Holocaust Museum. They've not only been most accommodating and welcoming, but I had the opportunity to walk through the museum, which was my first time here, and it's excellent. It's an excellent museum. It's laid out well, it's thoughtful, it has artifacts and material that lends itself to great educational opportunity. And anything that you can do to aside from coming to programs like this, I'm sure would be most appreciated by your children, your grandchildren, and generations and generations to come, because you can just walk through and see the important work that they're doing. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here. Now I have to begin by asking you to forgive me. Because a lot of times, again, we just saw that anti-Semitism is here. And it's raging its ugly head yet again. And people come to lectures like these hoping to get the answer, to get rid of anti-Semitism once and for all. So, again, if I could do that, I'd just, buy the museum and build it up. It's not so simple. So with that, we're going to hear my recommendations of things that we can do. So with that, let's begin.
This show of hate, I'm joined by Elizabeth Newman, former Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security and ABC News contributor. Elizabeth, how shocking is it to see banners flown from a freeway overpass in a major American city spreading these kind of messages of hate?
It really is heartbreaking to see, and yet not surprising. We have been in the middle of an uptick in the anti-Semitic activity. We saw the Goyim Defense League doing stickering, which is similar to the activities we were reporting on. And they've been doing that quite frequently for the last few years, so this is just their latest effort. But certainly what Kanye is doing is bringing amplification to it that is rather disgusting and likely will result in violence. We just don't know where or when.
And speaking of that uptick, the Anti-Defamation League reported anti-Semitic incidents reached an all-time high in the U.S. last year, a 34% increase year over year. What do you think is driving this increase?
It's hard to pinpoint. It is one of the oldest forms of hatred, one of the oldest forms of violent extremism. We often think back to World War II, but it goes far, far back. A lot of the conspiracy theories that we have been seeing on these leaflets, they are hundreds of years old. Some of the Bible verses that were printed on the sign over the freeway in LA, those have been used inaccurately by people for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories for hundreds of years. So it's hard to pinpoint why right now, other than we are in a 6-year uptick of domestic violent extremism in this country. So every form of conspiracy theory often ties back to Jews, unfortunately. And so anytime you see that increase in white supremacy, increase in other types of hate, you usually also see a rise in anti-Semitism.
And Elizabeth, one of the signs hanging over the 405 freeway that we just cannot ignore said, "Kanye is right." The rapper, formerly known as Kanye West, has been stoking anti-Semitic ideas in interviews. What responsibility do you think that he has in a case like this?
Look, this situation is tough. I don't know the specifics of his particular challenges. There's suggestions that perhaps he's not mentally well. But setting that aside, anytime you have a prominent figure like that, you're bringing attention and awareness to things that usually are on the fringe, usually you kind of push aside. He is giving it air and empowering these domestic violent extremist groups. We've been watching online chatter of people that are a part of these white nationalist, white supremacist groups, anti-Semitic groups, looking at what he is doing and viewing it as an opportunity. And so the concern I have, besides the fact that it's disgusting and intimidating and we just don't want it in our society, the broader concern is that usually these upticks then lead some very small percentage to go do something violent. And it's just very hard to predict when, where that might occur. So we really need voices of calm to condemn this rhetoric and say that is not who we are as a people, and that it will not stand. And you are seeing a number of political leaders say, come out and condemn this. But it would be great for Adidas to deplatform him, and everybody as much as possible to deplatform this anti-Semitic rant that he seems to be on, so that it doesn't possibly incite somebody to violence.
It is undeniable that Ye holds a large platform. And you mentioned it, several companies have already moved to cut ties with Ye, including his talent agency, CAA. But the German-based sneaker company Adidas has not. They say they are reviewing their relationship. The ADL called the silence, quote, deafening and dangerous. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Anytime you're platforming somebody with that level of prominence and giving airtime to his rants, It invites people who are both disaffected and mentally unwell, as well as people who are just bigots, people who have hatred in their heart. And the thing about the violent uptake that we've been seeing over the last 6 years is that as more of this kind of hateful rhetoric is in the mainstream, a lot of political leaders have been using hate-filled rhetoric in us-them context and the way that they view policy and ideology. The more that you have that in the mainstream, the more permission it gives to individuals to think that they should do something, and sometimes that something is violence and it leads to death.
Elizabeth Newman, thank you for your time.
So that's the context. That's the context here in LA, right? And I can go to any place, anywhere in the world, and bring similar context. We live now in a time where people are emboldened to be against the Jews. How come that is? Very few people, I imagine even Kanye would say that, he hates Jews. That's not what people say. People say that they're taking the position in defense of the underdog. They have reasons which seem to make sense to them, which perhaps make sense to the world of why they don't want Jews. But even the talking about Jews is pretty rare. Normally today they talk about Israel. So one of the things I want to do today is how do we in the Jewish community, those of us who are supporters of Israel, how do we deal with the complex issue of defining the difference between a legitimate disagreement of political policy and anti-Semitism? Is anybody who criticizes Israel an anti-Semite? So we have to determine how. In other words, it shouldn't be based on a gut feeling. It exists. We just saw that it exists. How could it be that after the horrors of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism still exists? It's only been 80 years. It's only been 80 years when a country stood up and said Jews are Untermenschen, that they are not fit to be part of society. And yet here you see it. You see it in the British Parliament. You see it in the news in the United States. People are now, once again, so shortly after what was considered the greatest humanitarian tragedy in the world, seem to have once again picked it up. What does modern anti-Semitism look like? What can we do about it? These are what we're going to try to deal with today. So first, let's talk about what is anti-Semitism. If I would ask you, what would you say?
Hate of Jews.
Just the hate of Jews?
And Israel.
And Israel, because Israel is a
Jewish state.
So anything associated with Jews.
It's a half-half.
Anything, would you say anything associated with Jews?
Absolutely.
Even like medicines?
They don't think about that.
Right. They don't think about anything that's of disadvantage, perhaps. But it has to do with an unhappy relationship with Jews. So let's start at the beginning. Okay? Now I'm going to show you a couple different pieces. This is the oldest. This piece is a commentary on the 5 books of Moses, and it is approximately 1,200 years old. So it's not new news, but it's interesting. What is the story? There's 2 brothers. One was named Yaakov, and the other was named Esau. In Jewish tradition, Yaakov is the forebearer of the Jewish people, and Esau is the forebearer of the European people, or i.e. the Christian world. Right? It's different than his uncle Yishmael, who's the forebearer of the Arab world. Their relationship with what we would call anti-Semitism is very, very different. But the Torah tells us that Esau and Yaakov were disenfranchised. They had a fight over the birthright, etc., etc. Yaakov ran away. Esau went on his own. He became very rich, very powerful, and Yaakov and Esau met at a particular time. And when they met, the Torah tells us that Esau fell on the neck of Yaakov and kissed him, and they wept. So the commentators want to know what's the nature of this kiss. So they say like this. They say, there in the Torah, the word kiss is vayishakehu, and it has dots on it. If you look in the Torah scroll, you'll see there's dots on it. So they want to know, what are the dots? So there are dots over the word. There's a controversy concerning a matter in a commentary on the commentary, okay? Some interpret the dots to mean that he did not kiss him wholeheartedly. Rabbi Simon ben Yochai said it is a well-known tradition that Esau hated Jacob, right? Yodea, right? Halacha hisha, sheyodea she'Esau sona leYaakov. Esau hated Jacob, but his compassion was moved at the time and kissed him wholeheartedly. What is this talking about? It says that there seems to be a biological, predetermined hate that exists between the children of Esau, i.e. the European, the Western European, the Slavs, the non-Islamic world, and the Jewish people. And he says there's not much you can do about it, right? So the question is, here we have an example of kissing, which seems to be an act of affection. So was that legitimate or not? So one opinion says it was legitimate, the other said it's not. Why is it not? Because you can't overcome your natural inclination. And why was it? Because Yaakov had brought many gifts to his brother, and the gifts had softened his heart, and therefore he's telling us that there's a way to accommodate their disgust with the Jewish people and keep things calm. So the ancient tradition, over 1,200 years old, tells us two things. One is that it exists, and there's nothing you're going to do about it. However, there is a way to ameliorate the effects. There is a way, through perhaps relationship, through gifts, through accommodation of some sort, that will allow the hate not to express itself in the worst way. That's the ancient tradition. More modern, Monica Schwartz, writes, hostility towards Jews is not simply one of prejudice among many, but something unique. It's unique because it has origins in a moral and conceptual interpretation of the world. Now, that, unique because it has its origins in a moral, conceptual interpretation of the world, that's already talking about a modern religion. What's that? So here you have an example, right? Here you have two statues. You can see them on the outside of Notre Dame. You can see them in Strasbourg at the cathedral. And one is Ecclesiasta, right? And she's the church. She's proud, tall, beautiful. She has a staff and a crown. This character is called Synagoga, like the word synagogue.
Right.
She's beaten down. She's blindfolded, unable to see the glory of Christianity. Sure, her staff is broken, meaning that perhaps at one time she led, but no more. And she's looking down because she is an outcast. But perhaps most telling and most interesting, she's holding a book, right? She's holding a chalice. Chalice means the blood of Christ, who died for the sins and brought eternal salvation. But the book, the people of the book, shows what once was is no longer. Okay? And that hatred of the Jews does not mean hatred of a specified other. It means of something clearly foreign. It's not that they hate everybody, but alleged evil in the world. What's the story behind this? Ecclesiastes is good, synagogue is bad. So it's not a choice between someone who's different than me. It's a choice between good and bad. Anti-Semitism represents a moral decision between good and bad. If I hate the Jew, it's because the Jew has acted in a way that is bad. And in the choice between good and bad, of course I'm going to choose good, i.e. against the Jew. This is Monica Schwartz-Friesel, right? All forms ultimately hark back to this conceptualization, right? Hitler, it was good and bad, right? Today, Kanye, he's not giving some far-fetched economic reason, good and bad. They take advantage of it, right? People that are looking to rewrite history are talking about the Jew doing something bad. Perhaps they were slave owners, or perhaps whatever it is, the bad thing they did, it warrants us to hate. Right? You said, who was the lady who came to me and said she wrote a letter to, okay, good. So that's what, ultimately, I don't even need to read the letter, and I never heard of the guy. But if we do a little research, we're going to see that he's framing his disgust in a good and bad scenario. If you have questions, don't hesitate, right? Who is this?
Martin Luther.
Martin Luther. Who is Martin Luther?
The Reformation.
What did he reform? No, he invented Protestantism and he reformed the Catholic. Why? Because the Catholics were too much like the Jews, had too many rituals and things, right? Originally, he liked the Jews because his thinking was if he could get the Jews to side with him against the Catholics, so that would be a good thing. But the Jews didn't do it, so he hated them. How much did he hate them? This is a little picture from the outside of his church in Württemberg, Germany. And what is it a picture? It's a little hard to see. This is a pig, a sow. And you have Jews wearing distinctive Jewish uniforms, sucking the anus of the pig and sucking the teats of the pig, right? Now, if you're a kid walking by this every single day, you begin to expect or begin to imagine that you understand what a Jew is. What is this a picture of? The wandering Jew, right? He has no shoes on. He's carrying a staff. Certainly not an attractive person. What does it mean, wandering Jew?
He doesn't have a home.
He doesn't have a home. So what? So it means he's a foreigner amongst us, right? Why doesn't he have a home? Because he's evil. And God has punished him. This is the classic trope, right, of anti-Semitism. Cool. Wait, don't go away.
Throughout history, anti-Semitism has taken on different forms, but it's always affected by the time and place in which it occurs. Different cultures, beliefs, events shape anti-Semitism, but throughout history, there are also salient elements that always repeat themselves. For instance, Jews have been blamed for being in league with the devil. In the Middle Ages, they were blamed for the Black Death and for poisoning wells. In certain places, entire communities were burned to death, even when the Pope came out against those accusations. In blood libels against the Jews that began in the Middle Ages and continue even today, the demonic image of the Jew recurs, and the Jew is accused of using the blood of non-Jewish victims in Jewish religious rituals. Treason and treachery have been associated with the Jews throughout history, so that from the beginnings of Christianity, the Jews were blamed for betraying Jesus to the Romans, an accusation that was only officially retracted by the Catholic Church after the Holocaust. In a trial that took place in 19th century France, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was accused of espionage and betraying his homeland. Ultimately, he was found innocent, and all those allegations were proven to be lies. During the Weimar Republic, the Jews as a group were accused of being unpatriotic. Even worse, they were accused of stabbing Germany in the back and plotting to bring about her military defeat, even though 100,000 of them served as officers and soldiers in the German army, and 12,000 Jews were killed fighting for their country. In the 20th century, the Jews were accused of being a demonic force that poisoned the world with conflicting ideas such as exploitative capitalism and communism. There are many other examples of accusations that have been made against the Jews based on social, religious, or historical circumstances that repeat themselves. For instance, Jews are always accused of caring only about money. They're accused of conspiracy. And they're always accused of plotting to take over the world.
Okay. Why is this important for you to know? Why did I show you this?
Because there's similarities to the
Well, more than similarities. You see, look, let's take a common trope. Jews have dual identity. So good, look at me, I live in Israel. I'm an American citizen, I have an American passport and an Israeli passport. And I chose to live in Israel, but I vote in the United States elections. Right? I have dual, yeah, I do. So if someone says, Cohn, you have dual identity, how do I know that they're not identifying a fact as opposed to hurling at me an anti-Semitic invective? How do I know that? What do I use to determine? So one of the ways that we're going to look at what has been historically identified as anti-Semitism, right? And we're going to look at different examples that are modern. If they lack this type of historical identity, so they might be legitimate political discourse, right? Political discourse can get pretty hot, right? But if they include this type of imagery, so it's not about politics anymore. Now it's about something different. Let's see. How is modern anti-Semitism connected to anti-Semitism in the past? Okay, so let's look at some modern anti-Semitism. This is the Harvard Law Record. Harvard. The question and answer section of an event last Thursday at the Harvard Law School student asked Jewish Israeli dignitary Tzipi Livni, "How is it that you're so smelly?" A question about the odor of Mrs. Tzipi Livni. She's very smelly, and I was just wondering. Now,
what year was this?
This was 2016. Okay? Now, that's an odd thing to talk to a political leader about in their country, and certainly no one got close enough to smell her, so even if it, right? So what was that based on? That was based on the idea that Jews don't bathe. That Jews are odorsome. Dirty. Okay. Right? Here, what is this? You don't speak Arabic? I don't either. It's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But why is it, forget that we know it's anti-Semitic, but what about this image is anti-Semitic?
Snake, poison.
A snake, what is a snake?
Poison.
A what?
Poison.
A poisonous, dangerous animal that most people are repulsed by. And now we've identified it with the symbol of the Israeli flag, Star of David, right? What is this? Right? Money. Jews. And how do I know it's a Jew? Big nose. Do all Jews have big noses? Are you Jewish? No. Jewish. Right? Right? How about this one? Who is this? Who's that a picture of? Mark Zuckerberg. Right? And what is he? He is a octopus. And what are his tentacles? Computers. Right? When they talk about, you better be careful because when you open your computer, Big Brother's watching. That's already the foundation of an anti-Semitic trope that Jews run the world. If they want to write, drop the internet, it's lousy. You spend all your time looking at a stupid screen. Okay, maybe I'll agree with them. And we can have a discussion. But the second they want to paint the picture of an octopus, a Jew with a nose that already goes down his own throat, that's already a problem. Now I know we're not talking about the internet. Whatever the topic of this cartoon is, it's not about that. It's about hating Jews, right? Here you have another example in modern politics. Here's a good one, right? Israel kills. Okay, so you know what? If I'm against them and I'm in a war with them, and Israel just went into my village in the Palestinian areas, and they killed people. So I might write, Israel kills. What tells me it's anti-Semitic? Dollar sign. What does that have to do with anything? Because it's not about a political comment. It's about hating Jews, right? What is this? This is what? The European Union, right? And he gave a speech in the European Union. And what did he say? Abbas? He said the Jews have poisoned the water in the Palestinian territories. Jews poisoning water in Palestinian territories is a pest, right? What is this? Right, here you have the United States and Jews cutting into a Palestinian child. For what purpose? To drink its blood, right? The ancient bloodline. Stereotype is an oversimplified generalization about a person.
Wait, will you go back one?
Yes, I
Sorry.
certainly will.
Will you talk about the the sweeping the Palestinian up in the top.
Right, so what is this? This is an Israeli IDF soldier. This is Palestine, right? They're not, there's no issue here about, let's divide the land. None of that. This is what is today called Israel, they call Palestine. What's ethnic cleansing? What is that? Genocide. It's the idea of destroying a people based on their ethnicity, right? And so what are they doing? The IDF is slaughtering the Palestinians. Is that at all remotely true? Are they going in and slaughtering men, women, and children?
No.
Have innocents died? Yes.
So what makes it anti-Semitic?
What?
What makes it anti-Semitic?
Because this is not talking about the problem of innocents dying. This is talking about wiping out a people because of their ethnicity, right? People die, right? I was just reading, right, in the United States, when England and the United States began to bomb Germany during World War II. So hundreds of thousands of innocents died. Not every German was a Nazi, right? Not everybody in Japan was looking to overthrow the United States, but they died. So they asked Churchill, how could that be? He said, it's an unfortunate rule of law. So too in Israel, right? When the Israeli soldiers have identified a place where missiles are shot from, and it happens to be the property of a school, and they go in to wipe out the missiles and children die, there's no interest in killing kids. None. But it happens because they're using the school, they're allowing the schools to be used as a military objective, right? So people will die in a war. That's why war is terrible. But it's not ethnic cleansing. What the Nazis did to the Jews was ethnic cleansing. What? Yeah, he's happy about it. What the Nazis did to Jews was ethnic cleansing. What was attempted in Rwanda was ethnic cleansing, right? But what's happening in Israel, by any reasonable definition, is not ethnic cleansing. So it's not a legitimate political point of view. It's attempting to breed a hatred. Let's continue. A stereotype is an oversimplified generalization about a person or a group of people. Okay? Right? Give me an example of stereotypes. Jews have big noses. Why? Because the air is free.
Yeah.
Don't laugh at that. It's an anti-Semitic joke. Right? It's an old. Why? No. So now let's go. Why do people stereotype? Okay, not that it's funny. Why do people stereotype?
Easier to understand.
What?
Easier to understand for others.
Good. Now I want to point out a thing to us. One of the affectations of World War II, we'll talk about it much more later on today when we talk about women. But one of the affectations of World War II was time change. There used to be a time where time was long, right? I'll give you an example. If you read halacha, Jewish law, you see very often one of the topics is what happens if you find out that someone you love died after the 7-day period of mourning. It was you only find 3 weeks later. Why? Because how did you find out? You didn't pick up a phone. You didn't have the internet. You sent a letter. And the letter took time to get to you. That's the way it is. Today, everything is instantaneous. So when you want, today they have, what's it called? I'm not so savvy, I apologize. They, Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Twitter's 187 digits. Think about that. Twitter is changing the way we get our news. It's the way people are getting elected. It's the way people are being influenced. 187 letters, including spaces. How much education is going on in 187 letters? So you see that time is different. Stereotyping allows us to plug into a very limited time in a way. She had a big nose and she was pushy. I'm talking about good, right? She had big lips and a wide nose. I'm talking about okay. Dumb as a doornail. I'm talking about what? Polish. Okay, so you see stereotyping. Are there Jews with big noses?
Yes.
Yeah. Are there blacks with big lips?
Yes.
Are there Poles who are stupid? Yes, but that's not that's not the people. That's it. But they use that as a stereotype to allow us to get an image in a very short period of time. What is the danger in stereotyping?
You don't see people as individuals.
Right. You never get yes.
Well, usually there's a kernel of truth in a stereotype.
Okay.
But the thing is, stereotyping limits your capacity to learn or to understand the bigger picture.
That's correct.
And when you have stereotyping, you're not open to more information.
That is correct.
Like the way African Americans arrived to America, for example.
Okay, I don't want to get into specific
No,
examples, but the
but-
fact of the matter is you are 1,000% correct. That stereotyping precludes us from seeing the bigger picture. Stereotyping doesn't allow us to go into a subject in greater detail to get a fuller picture, to allow us to make a more informed decision. Traditional stereotypes against Jews. We're stubborn people who are unwilling to assimilate into society as a whole, right? The Bible tells us that we're stiff-necked people. In league with the devil, right? Because we're an absolute evil. We're outsiders. We're not like everybody else. Everybody else celebrates Christmas, we celebrate Hanukkah, right? Care only for money. That's our motivation, is money. Where did that come from? Yeah, there was a point. If you look at the New Testament, it says clearly that non-Jews are not allowed to loan money to each other. So they needed to borrow money since business, right? Because of business. So where did they get it from? The Jews. So the Jews weren't allowed to farm. They weren't allowed to be in business. They weren't allowed to open stores. They weren't allowed to do anything but money lend. So now they're only for money. Engage in shady business practices. Cause of disease and death. Jews use the blood of Christians for ritual purposes. Plotting to take over the world. Unpatriotic. The worst race. Strong and very dangerous, like cockroaches. Right? Behind Bolshevism. Exploitive capitalism. Whatever you hate, the source of it is Judaism. Now here's one. Now I want you to overcome your natural inclination. I want you to look at it objectively. Okay? Objectively. Yes, we all know this is Trump. I don't care whether you like him or not. It's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
But this was a cartoon that appeared in the New York Times. So what is this cartoon about? Trump, who is who at this point? The President of the United States. The most powerful man in the world. Like it or not. Who is this? Bibi Netanyahu. As a dog. The dog is attached to a leash. And he's not only here as an individual, but he's here as Prime Minister of Israel, the Jew. The leash. What is the President of the United States? Blind. Okay? Is this a legitimate? And he's being led by the Jewish state, Israel. He's being led by the Jewish state. Is that legitimate political commentary?
No.
Yes! Except for one thing. What? What the hell is this? A yarmulke on Trump? All of a sudden, he's a frum yid? What is this? But this tells me it hasn't. Without this, okay, someone thinks the United States is being led down the wrong path by Israel. Fine, good, you're entitled. But the second they stick a kippah on Trump, now they're telling me something else, right? This is about the Jews taking advantage of a mental lightweight, perhaps. That's anti-Semitism. That's anti-Semitism.
Maybe he's going to
sometimes
his daughters for Shabbat?
What?
Maybe he's going to his daughters for Shabbat.
Right.
That's a joke.
Yeah, no, it's possible, right? But then it would need a commentary.
Tiny joke. Tiny.
Rabbi, he did legitimately identify himself.
I agree with what you're saying, but if the kippah had not been on, would that have changed?
Yes, I think it would.
Yeah, because the implication would.
Then it's a legitimate political commentary. But they couldn't leave it at that. They wanted to put that kippah on because they weren't about political commentary. They were aiming to do something else.
Yeah.
To paint Jews
Well,
in a particular way. Yes.
A couple things. First of all, the New York Times is identified as being, Jewish based. So the Jews criticizing the Jews in the third is
not Jewish based.
Who told you that?
The New York Times is not recognized to be a.
No, that's
No.
but Jews being anti-Semitic towards other Jews, darn tootin', it's bad.
Really?
Oh yeah,
All right.
it's bad. It's desensitizing. It's bad. It's
We have
it's-
enough enemies.
Yeah. There's I don't know any source that would legitimize. There is a source for when blacks are talking in a pejorative way against other blacks. For some reason, I don't understand it, but it seems to be accepted. But for Jews to make anti-Semitic statements about Jews, it's absolutely not acceptable. That, to the best of my knowledge. Okay, let's see. A more modern commentary.
How can anti-Zionism be the new anti-Semitism? Surely there's no connection between them. Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews as a people, a race, an ethnic group. Anti-Zionism is an objection to a country, a nation, a state. What's the connection between them? Anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates, so that new anti-Semites can deny that they're anti-Semites at all, because their hate is different from the old. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th and early 20th century, they were hated for their race. Today, they're hated for their nation state, Israel. What all three have in common is that there are different ways of saying that Jews have no right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as other human beings. In each era, anti-Semitism has focused on the primary form of collective Jewish existence. In the Middle Ages, they were a religious community, so they were hated for their religion. In the 19th century, when many European Jews became secular, they formed an ethnic group, a race, and were hated as such. Today, when their primary collective embodiment is as the people of Israel in the state of Israel, they are hated for their state. Anti-Zionism is the latest mutation of the world's longest hate.
So that's Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, former chief rabbi of the UK. That's a great piece because in just a couple of seconds, he identifies what is the predominant fig leaf that is used by anti-Semites as they pursue this nonsensical, irrational hate that seems to be impossible to eradicate. But they understand that as the people become more sophisticated, blind hatred is becoming less socially acceptable. So the hatred has to has to be covered, if you will, by what would be a more acceptable disagreement.
Rabbi,
Yes.
your talk is fascinating, but can you connect it to what happened in Charlottesville? And
Yeah, I'm going to get
LA? No, I'm saying anti-Zionism and the religious background
Great.
that you talked about, I don't see have anything to do, or
Okay.
very little to do with the actual anti-Semitic
Okay, great.
instances.
So
that we're
I
seeing.
mentioned this in a lecture before, I'm going to mention it again, but you brought up an excellent point. When we study anti-Semitism, I want you to understand that anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, imagine it a great big elephant in a room. It's a big elephant in the room. And there are different narratives, okay? There are different narratives. So there's the Jewish narrative, or the victim's narrative in the Holocaust. There's the perpetrator, the Nazis. They had a narrative. They had, an explanation for why they were doing it. There's the bystanders. People have different understandings of what's going on. Okay. As a result, we could say in the world of anti-Semitism, there are three distinct narratives. One narrative is the Jewish narrative. We get hit in the head, right? It's pretty clear. Another narrative is I hate the Jews no matter what. Nothing you're going to say to me is going to make a bit of difference because I know the truth and I hate Jews. I'm unopen to any discussion. And then there's a group in the middle that are can be swayed either way. The group that marched in South Carolina, they were these were not deep intellectuals. They knew what they knew, and that's the point. You're not going to convince them. So you know what? I'll give you the punchline. Don't try. They're gonna hate you, hate us, hate me, no matter what I do. There are people who are always gonna be our friends. We don't have to waste much time on them. What are we arguing about? We're arguing about that middle ground that's open to reason. But no matter how much education I spill forth into the system, the people that marched, they're not reading newspapers. They're looking at comic books. And they're just not going to be swayed. They hate me no matter what. Davar Yadua, Yaakov, Esau, son as Yaakov. It's from biblical times. Okay. Let's continue.
Can you hate Israel and not hate Jews?
Sure. Yeah, of course you can. But we got it. It's hard to find here. You want to find people that hate Israel but aren't anti-Semitic? You got to go to Israel, right? Because they're coming out in droves. They don't like the government. They don't like the policies. They don't like what we're becoming. Good, okay. But nowhere does it say, right, that I hate the other side because they're money hungry vipers. Okay, so it's harder to find it in outside of this. Yeah.
In that example you gave around Charlottesville, the 3 groups, I would put students on college campuses maybe in that group that is swayable.
Yes.
Are you going to talk about that at all?
Yeah.
Because I have a college student.
Scary. The Middle East conflict is part of the anti-Semitic discourse. So where do they go to school?
Scripps College.
Oh, Scripps. Yeah, I know, it's in San Diego.
No.
No? Where is it?
Scripps in Claremont.
Oh, Claremont.
Anyway,
It's a good school for Mona School,
Yeah.
right? I went to UCLA. So in UCLA, there's a great big thoroughfare called Bruin Walk, right? And on Bruin Walk, at least it was, 50 years ago when I was there, right? On Bruin Walk, you have tables on each side hawking their ideological wares, right? Good, still is. So they're hawking disagreements about politics. But let's see if in fact that's conspired to take over the world. Good, so this is a campus protester, right? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, isn't that just expressing an opinion? Is that anti-Semitic or not?
Yes,
Why?
because there's not gonna be any Israel.
That's correct. This is not talking
Well,
about
they're implying they're
a
prisoners.
compromise, right? The river, what river are we talking about?
Jordan.
Jordan. What sea are we talking about? The Mediterranean. There's nothing in between, right? If we get rid of the Jews in between those two bodies of water, no Jews will be left. So again, does she know that?
Right.
I
Does
don't
she know that?
I don't know. I didn't talk to her, but she's walking around with the sign. So she has to have a certain amount of responsibility that she's advertising something she might not understand. But it doesn't help your kid. Okay, it doesn't help your kid.
Notice her t-shirt.
Yeah. Okay, she's into it, right? Delegitimizing Israel. What is that? Now, what can we say that Israel should not have been established in 1948? Is that fair?
No.
Yeah, it's fair
to say it.
You didn't want Israel, so say it. Good. And there's people here that say 1776 was a terrible year because the United States. Good. Fine enough. But what do we got here? Arbeit macht frei. What is that? From a concentration camp. And this is meant with Gaza, right? So the French newspaper is equating Gaza with a concentration camp. Is that at all true?
No.
Are people being gassed in Gaza?
No.
Are men and women, are women and children being shot and starved to death? No, they're not.
Well, they would say that they are being.
They can say it all they want, but it's not true. In other words, we know it's true. We know when people are killed because of war. Israel documents it, right? They document it because the world forces Israel to document it. But it's not Auschwitz. Do you understand what Auschwitz was? People lived on 125 calories a day, if they got it.
If they were lucky.
If they were lucky. They were sent into gas chamber, holding their children and breathing noxious gas. And then their golden teeth were pulled out while they were burned. It's not. There's Kentucky Fried Chicken in Gaza. There's pizza. What's a pizza place?
Pizza Hut.
Pizza Hut, right? People are driving Rolls Royces and
living in
Mercedes Benz, right? Many, not all, many live terribly. Many live in places that I could never afford in 100,000 years. So it's a community. It has its pros and its cons, but it's not a concentration camp. Israel's perceived as the collective Jew. Now, I'll give you an example, right? Right, the real plague, what is it? Other than the fact that it looks like an Israeli flag, right? It's right out of the Nazi handbook, right? Here, why is he taking off the mask and it says ISIS?
Because ISIS is evil and
Right, ISIS is an evil that people who have little contact with World War II understand. So the Jew is ISIS. They're very anti-Semitic. Doesn't matter for the immediate effect for that soundbite. It's fine. The Jewish community in France was warned ahead of time. The 11/13 terror attacks, right? It means that when they attacked the kosher restaurant and when they attacked the kosher store, the Jews were told to get out because they're the ones who did the attack, right? What is this? The Jewish state sucking the blood of an innocent Palestinian child. Right? And what is this? The Holocaust. And who are the three arbiters of the Holocaust? Hitler, right? From ISIS, I forgot his name offhand. And what? Baghdadi, right? And Benjamin Netanyahu, right?
I don't understand.
In other words, they're equating the Holocaust perpetrators, Hitler, with modern day perpetrators. And he just like he's wearing a swastika, he's wearing a Jewish star. i.e. Nazism and Judaism are the same thing. And Nazism and Israel are the same thing. Right? Every Jew is identified with Israel. The BDS in 2015 pressures to cancel the performance of Jewish American rapper Matisyahu. What does Matisyahu have to do with Israel? Nothing. He's just a Jew. Nothing. He's a Jew, and all Jews are bad, right? Pink washing, right? There was a gay parade in Chicago, 2016. The Jewish gay pride organization was not allowed to participate. Not because they were Israeli, but because they were Jewish.
Except they allowed the Nazis to march.
What?
Except they allowed the Nazis to march in Skokie.
Yeah, because it's easier to swallow a Nazi because you agree with him.
Because what?
You might agree with him. Now this is a new affectation that only happened after World War II, right? It didn't exist before World War II. Using classic anti-Semitic stereotypes within the Muslim, for example, right? Here's a Nazism and the Arab, right? The Arab is today's Jew, right? Here, the Jews are a filthy race of rats, right? If you look at Nazi movies, they used to depict Jews as rats, right? The protocols of the Elder Zion now in Arabic, right? More, right? Here's Auschwitz, and only care for money, i.e. the Jews are using the Holocaust to manipulate people to make money. Right here you have also the Auschwitz symbol, if you will, $6 million. Right? This has nothing to do with political debate. This is wholesale, classic anti-Semitism. And here you have more, right? Here you have the classic picture from the Warsaw Ghetto, right? A child being arrested by the Nazis, and here you have a child now what happened? This child went to Treblinka and lived maybe another 2 weeks. This child was kicked out of his home and sent to a reform school for throwing rocks at cars along the freeway. Okay?
Her body language is completely different.
Oh well, this kid's scared. This kid's frightened.
He knows he's in trouble. That's why his mouth
Right.
is open.
But these guys, it's just we know what happens to these people. We can trace them, right? Stop doing what Hitler did to you. We're not. We never have, right? Here you have classic, right? The Jewish kid, Nazi soldier, Palestinian kid, Jewish soldier. And here you have 1948, like an Auschwitz number. Right? These are all examples of how anti-Semitism has infiltrated victimization. Right? Jewish star, instead of it saying Jude, Jew, says Muslim. Right? And Frank wearing a keffiyeh. Right? And Dresden. What was Dresden? It was a Hollywood movie. What's it about? The Allies bombed the German city of Dresden in 1944, right? And it was terrible. Firebombed them. It was terrible. The entire city was a inferno, and hundreds of thousands of people died.
It's more than the atomic weapons.
I'm not sure. Could be. I'll take your word. Right. That being said, right, were they bombed because they were Germans? Or were they bombed because there was a war going on? Does that make a difference?
Yeah,
Hell yes. War is hell. It's bad. But there's a big difference between making war against the people who have no designs on you at all and bombing a city because it had strategic places within the city, but bombing those, it's bad, it's terrible. What?
Apparently it didn't have any strategic.
No, it did because if you read the papers from Churchill and Franklin, Roosevelt rather, at that time, what was their goal? The goal was to diminish the German workforce in order to force them into a early surrender. And that was the goal, to get them to surrender, right? Was this terrible? Yes. Was it against American policy? Yeah, it was. The American boys did not think they were making war on civilians. So it was a turn in world values. But it wasn't a Jewish thing. It has nothing to do with Jews. There were no Jews in Dresden. Israel has the right to defend itself. I thought it was a cute thing. Professor Yehuda Bauer, who is from Yad Vashem, he writes, the Holocaust was motivated not by structural problems within German society, as many believe, because the Jews had money and the Germans didn't. That's not what happened. Social structures don't murder. People murder. And they have to be made to understand why murdering is desirable, why murder is an answer to a problem. The Holocaust was the result of a mutation of historic anti-Semitism into a racist and genocidal political act. That mutation played a central part in the forces that led to the war within whose framework it occurred. The Holocaust appears as an ideological genocide within the framework of an ideological world war. It was purely a philosophy to kill Jews that motivated the Nazis. Anti-Semitism, writes Devorah Lipstein. Without centuries of this persistent hatred, the Third Reich would have found it impossible to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people to despise, scapegoat, and ultimately participate in the murder of European Jewry. Because it's lasted so long, because we saw already in the Bible, it made the ability for the Nazis in modern times to do what they wanted to do.
Nazi ideology was a worldview that claimed to explain everything about the world and how it functions. At its core, the ideology was racial and biological, totalitarian and imperialistic. Nazi ideology viewed the world as divided into races, superior and inferior races. And of course, the Aryan race, the so-called Aryan race, was the superior race to which the Nazis attributed all positive developments in humanity, in arts, in science, in technology, and so on. And all the other races of humanity fit into the racial hierarchy in various rungs beneath the so-called Aryan race. For example, the Latin race, the French, the Italians, and so on, were one rung below the Aryan race, who could appreciate culture, but do not create culture and the arts and science and so on. Within this view, the Jews were viewed as a kind of anti-race, an inhuman race of some sort, a creature of some sort that existed in human form. And the Jews were by nature evil and destructive It was by no accident that the Nazis viewed the Jews in their ideology as kind of microbe on the one hand, or as the devil incarnate on the other. In other words, some kind of inhuman creature with supernatural powers that could destroy everything that the Aryan race and other people had built in this world. Where did the Nazis get these ideas from? Clearly, they didn't invent anything that they argued. The Nazis drew their ideas from earlier beliefs, and particularly from developments in 19th century research in the sciences and the social sciences, and the development of modern racism, and the development of modern anti-Semitism. Nazi policymaking then was the introduction, the newness that the Nazis brought to this world. Not the specific ideas that they brought together from the 19th century, but rather making those ideas, coalescing them into one distinct worldview to explain how the world functions and how it ought to function, and then turning that ideology into the engine for policymaking, first of all for Germany, and ultimately for all the world. And within that policymaking, a special place was set aside for the Jews. The Jews who constituted the greatest threat to the world because of their destructive nature and because of their immutable nature, they cannot change. And hence Nazi policymaking regarding the Jews, which stood at the heart of Nazi ideology, also ultimately was part of what stood at the heart of Nazi policymaking and led in the end to the final solution.
Much of the Nazi thinking is still germane today in anti-Semitism. So again, we're talking with an irrational outlook, world outlook, that doesn't allow.
Nazi ideology was a worldview.
What can we do about it? Okay. First, let's see what Rabbi Sachs suggests.
After all, if we're not Jewish, what has it got to do with us? The answer is that anti-Semitism is about the inability of a group to make space for difference. And because we're all different, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Hitler. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Stalin. It isn't Jews alone who suffer under the radical Islamists and others who deny Israel's right to exist. Anti-Semitism is the world's most reliable early warning sign of a major threat to freedom, humanity, and the dignity of difference. It matters to all of us, which is why we must fight it together.
Okay, so the first thing that he suggests is that, again, that element of people to whom they're not going to listen to us, their mind is made up, they're the people that marched in South Carolina. Don't waste your time. To the rest of the world, let us point out some accuracies. And that is that anti-Semitism is the precursor to a lack of human rights. Wherever it's ever been exercised, anti-Semitism ultimately leads to the whittling away of a free society. That's something that they can think about, they can research, they can find out, is it true or is it not? The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance is working with a definition of anti-Semitism that is being accepted into law in many states in the United States and in many countries around the world. Denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, example, by claiming the existence of the State of Israel, is a racist endeavor. It's not, but that's the claim, and the result is they deny the Jewish people the right to exist. Applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, right? What other nation allows hundreds of thousands of people every day who are declared enemies of the state to come in and work in the state, right? And if those borders are closed for a day, 2 week, month, the world is upright. But if any other country denies entree into it, right? There is no uprising. There is no uprising, right? using symbols and images associated with classical anti-Semitism, as we've seen, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli society to that of the Nazis, as we've seen.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Thank you. At this point, because you said how positive it is that we allowed so many to come into our borders daily, enemies who hate us but who work in Israel, so they're allowed to come into the borders. What is taken from that very positive thinking is the most negative thing that kids in the campuses are faced with on a daily basis and have no answers, and that is, do you realize how hideous it is to stop these people at checkpoints?
Yes.
Do you know what it means to them when they're in a hurry to get somewhere and they're stopped at checkpoints?
Yes.
Do you know how insulted they are when their families are in the car
Yes.
and they're stopped at checkpoints? It's you Israelis who do that.
Correct.
Why do you say that all those people going across the border to work are sworn
What should the
enemies?
kid
Okay,
answer?
first of all, both of you have done an
What
interesting
is the
thing.
answer to
I'm going to
that?
tell you right now.
They need an answer
I'm going to give you
on their lips.
I'm going to give you one
And
right
they
now.
have
A
none.
simple one. I'll give you one. First of all, let me get to you. Right? I didn't say all. I didn't say all. But a lot. A lot.
How do you know?
Because we know who they're from. They have to show their ID. We can trace them. They're arrested. They have criminal records.
All the workers?
Not all. Why do you use that word all? A lot. No, I don't even know most. A lot. How many sworn haters of the United States who live in Mexico drove out into California? 1,000?
I don't know.
5,000? 10,000?
Maybe they all do when they're coming over the border.
Maybe.
None of them do. I don't know.
Maybe, but it's probably not all, or it's probably not none. But there's a lot. And in the United States, they preclude it. There's tremendous movements here. We don't have that movement. We accept it. But we're worried about it. Here's your answer. We're afraid. Here's a simple answer. Right now, the reality, not the theory, the reality is Jews are afraid. We're afraid. And we will do what we feel necessary to make ourselves feel more comfortable. Last week, 10 days ago, 2 13-year-old boys were standing in a bus stop and they got bullets in their head by an Arab who was. They got bullets in their head. They were killed because an Arab drove by, rolled down his window, and shot the 2 boys. It scares the hell out of us. We're frightened. And if making them wait in line will make Israeli society feel more secure, we'll do it. We're not saying they can't go in, but we're saying we don't want you to bring bullets. We don't want you to bring material that can be turned into bombs. We want to know what's going on. We need you to have papers. We need to, and it's unfortunate. We wish we could have an open border, right? Like no other country in the world. No one has open borders. But Israel should have it because we're supposed to be better. Fine. But we're frightened right now. So I suppose we need a period of time where no kids are shot waiting for buses, where no buses are blown up with mothers and babies, where there's not been terrorist attempts, where they're not shooting missiles, not 1 or 2, thousands of missiles on kindergartens right across the border. And you can go see them. You know, it's an interesting thing. You walk into Stay Road. So there's a kindergarten in Stay Road where the little kids make arts and crafts out of bombshells. That's crazy. That's crazy. If Quebec, if Toronto shot a couple of missiles into New York or into Buffalo, that'd be the end of it. That'd be the end of it. But there is a double standard, and that's what they were talking about here, right? There is a 3D test that you can use to determine if something is anti-Semitism. Demonization. When the Jewish state is being demonized, when Israel's actions are blown out of all sensible proportion, when comparisons are made between Israelis and Nazis, between Palestinian refugee camps and Auschwitz, this is anti-Semitism, not legitimate criticism. That's what we've been talking about. It hits us. We too accept it. We too can easily be swayed of the possible legitimacy of the argument. Give me a legitimate argument. Now, the legitimate way to ask the question is, I understand you're afraid, how can we make the border crossing better? How can we make the border crossing better? So instead of having 3 gates for 1,000 people, let's have 50 gates so people can get through quickly, right? Like at an airport. Like at an airport.
Like in Tijuana.
What?
Like in Tijuana.
Oh, like in Tijuana, right? Or like in any of them. You know, there is a way to have a civil conversation about it, but we have to be able to identify what we're talking about. Double standards. Criticism of Israel is applied selectively. When Israel singled out by the United Nations for human rights abuses while the behavior of no major abuses, China, Iran, Cuba, and Syria is ignored. When Israel's Magen David Adom alone among the world's ambulance services denied admission to the International Red Cross. This is anti-Semitism. When Syrians were bombed, right, and when they were disenfranchised by their own government, and Israel gave them medical treatment, suddenly no one heard a word about it, right? No one heard a word about it. When Turkey, who has a vile record of anti-Semitism, right, benefited from scores and scores of IDF military doctors and units with materials going in to help these earthquake victims, it wasn't front page news, right? That's a double standard. Yeah.
Why do you think that it wasn't, or that it isn't news, period? Why? Why is just the bad news?
I think anti-Semitism is pretty pervasive.
So you think anti-Semitism is on CNBC and
Yes.
CNN?
Yes.
And so is
Don't forget BBC and ABC.
and that stems from all that we're seeing, or anything in particular?
No, it stems from all we're seeing. From
And
all
there's
we're
nothing
seeing.
we can do about it?
Okay, we're going to get to that. But not a lot. But we'll get to it. When Israel's fundamental right to exist is denied, alone among peoples of the world, do Jews deserve a homeland? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So then we have to have an Israel. Can't have yes, but. If we have a homeland, we have. Is it perfect Israel? No, it's not. But is it legitimate? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it legitimate as any other country in the world? Yes. Just like other countries are imperfect, so is Israel imperfect. Do we wish we could be better? We're trying. We're really trying. But there's a lot. It's not like any place else. It's complicated. Be active. Now, what should I do about it? So now I'm going to tell you what you already know. Be active in your community. Vote. If someone's anti-Semitic, and vote. You got to show up to vote. Anyone who doesn't show up to vote in this country is a bystander, if not an inadvertent perpetrator. Okay? Call the police if you encounter anti-Semitism that you feel poses in immediate danger. If someone is picketing a synagogue or a house, call the police. Call the police. Not one, but everybody. Call the police over and over again. Because as a United States citizen, you have the right to be protected. Write your community representatives to protest any and all anti-Semitic displays in your community. Okay? You have to be civically active. That's just part of the responsibility if you don't want anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Also to enforce about the police. Every single time you call, they keep a record.
Yes.
So when something happens, if you haven't called, they go, well, we didn't know. Well, now they have a record, a clear record that this is what's happened. And it's been going on for years. People don't call.
You have one of the leading advocates of societal intervention here, and that is the Wiesenthal Center. The Wiesenthal Center really leads the world in that, right? Right? Respond to anti-Semitism wherever you can. In schools, on campuses, you have to help your kid, right? You have to not only encourage them to be involved, but you have to call, you have to get involved, get other parents involved, right? In the malls, where you shop.
I have a question about the college campuses.
Yeah.
So because I have a kid in college too, the Students for Justice for Palestine group, when they have their conferences on these campuses and they invite speakers who are known anti-Semites, they have published articles, they have written on, social media. The ADL has, marked them as anti-Semites. what are you supposed to do?
So I'll tell you what I would do.
Yeah.
Right? If they're having a conference, I would find someone who knows what they're talking about. Not on their side, on our side. Right? When they make a statement, I want someone who knows the facts there. And then I would go to the campus administration. I would say, we want someone there to take notes. It's against the law to run a campus-sponsored event that is not, how do you call it? We can see through it. What's it called? Transparent. You have a right to transparency, just like they have a right to transparency. If there's students for Zionism or whatever, so they let them find someone who knows the facts.
So speakers are allowed to come because of the First Amendment.
That's correct.
Freedom. But
That's
it's
correct.
just having someone present to make sure
Unless
that Jewish
you have to look at
students
the bylaws of the university. If they're spouting overt hate, gas the Jews, they're not allowed to come. But if they're saying, look, we feel that Ashdod is a Arab community and they think it's a Jewish community, and we want the United States not to give money anymore to Israel. All right, I disagree with it, but it's in a point of view. But you have to have someone there who says, please understand Ashdod was, and this is that. And so the truth is there so people can understand it. And by that, you can talk to the dean of student activities. They're the ones who can give you the guidelines that must be met.
I can say anti-Semitic things and Adidas can't drop me.
I've been out of this. This is just what I saw. It's a lot of Jews.
People think this. People think Jews control Hollywood. People think Jews control the banks. And to pretend that they don't, and to not deal with it in a straightforward manner, we will never gain any kind of understanding with each other.
From high-profile entertainers, online, and in real life, anti-Semitism is being expressed publicly and violently.
When somebody like a Kanye comes out and makes anti-Semitic statements that people that are grounded in this world, people that have some wisdom, have been around for a little while, might just look and say, well, that's crazy. Young people that idolize this individual don't think that. They think, well, there's something to it.
I think the problem with cultural icons like Kanye West, or Ye, as he calls himself, with musicians, with politicians, if they start putting about anti-Semitic comments and making them popular, that can have a very serious effect.
In Ottawa, high school students charged with hate crime offenses.
So students who are going to school and being faced with other students drawing swastikas on the ground and Heil Hitler.
Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth, a school board trustee and family doctor, has herself been the target of hate-filled anti-Semitic emails and death threats.
People saying that they want to gas me and my entire family, that they want my children to burn, to die, to be tortured.
In Jewish advocacy group enabled Canada's latest audit, a notable increase of anti-Semitic incidents and a sixth record-setting year. Statistics Canada finds Jewish Canadians, representing around 1% of the population, remain the most targeted for hate crimes in this country. Anti-Semitism is becoming mainstream, says this advocate.
Anti-Semitism presents on both the left and the right, and I think we're quite familiar with anti-Semitism on the right. It would be swastikas, Nazi symbols, ideology, and the like, and people are pretty quick to condemn it. What happens is when we experience it on the left, it gets dismissed because Jews are viewed to be powerful and privileged.
And then in 2016, after Donald Trump was elected and gave license to bigots and anti-Semites to come out of the woodwork, you saw all over social media an incredible escalation of anti-Semitism that has led to anti-Semitism in the streets. You've seen in the last 6 years the 3 most horrific incidents of anti-Semitism in North American history.
As the Jewish community of Squirrel Hill prepares to bury its dead.
In Pittsburgh, October 2018, 11 Jewish people were killed in a synagogue while attending Saturday morning services.
And when one group is attacked, it only opens the door to other people to be attacked.
Nate Leipziger survived the Holocaust.
August of 1943. And we marched to Birkenau, and we went through barbed wire, and they shaved our hair, And then we were tattooed, and my father showed up right behind me, and so my number was 133,628, and his was 629.
In the time they have left, survivors share their stories in an effort to curb a rising tide of anti-Semitism.
Maybe some of them will have a better idea of life, not to mistreat other people, to treat people properly.
Today, I'm going to do something very, very, very different.
Influencers like Montana Tucker on TikTok are also using their platform to reach and teach Gen Z followers.
My grandparents both are Holocaust survivors. My grandma was in Auschwitz, and a dream of theirs always, I think, was for me to go visit.
At 12 years old, I was beaten up for being Jewish.
Jasmine Crannett's horrific experience with anti-Semitism made headlines in London, England in 2007. But she's fighting back with an educational exhibit meant to improve Holocaust education.
We have the opportunity to tell people, those jokes are not okay. Those jokes are about 6 million Jewish people that were murdered. Those jokes were about my whole family that was slaughtered. I don't think people understand how deep-rooted it is in our pain and our story.
We can't talk about the Holocaust without talking about anti-Semitism. We are based in Toronto, metropolitan city, but there's millions of people and millions of students in schools that are not able to come to us.
The Tour for Humanity is a mobile classroom designed to empower people to take action against hate.
It's basically a lesson to not let history repeat itself.
So where are we right now? We're in the Toronto Holocaust Museum on the Sherman campus.
In just a few months, a state-of-the-art facility for Holocaust education will open in Toronto.
We really hear firsthand from a survivor each step along the way on these large-scale testimony kiosks.
At the end of the day, how does this center help fight anti-Semitism?
Once they do this deep dive into the Holocaust, they're then able to reflect and have a conversation about the connections between this history and everyday life. We hope to inspire them through the actions of the survivors who went through this terrible trauma and yet came here, rebuilt, and then used their voices to stand up against injustice.
Being a good citizen by itself, which is everything we've been talking about, that you know about, you think it's going to get rid of anti-Semitism? No. So now what? It won't. Holocaust was an absolute evil. We understand where unchecked anti-Semitism can lead. Captain G.M. Gilbert, who was a psychologist who was attached to the American government during Nuremberg, the trials, he interviewed all the top Nazis. And he was writing a paper on the source of evil. And he was trying to identify the source of evil. So he wrote, in my work with the defendants of the Nuremberg trials, I was searching for the nature of evil, and now I think I've come close to defining it: a lack of empathy. People can hate, but they have no feeling for it, they have no connection. It's one of the characteristics that connects all the defendants: a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow men. Evil, I think, is the absence of empathy. We have to begin to teach empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's the ability to say, there for the grace of God go I. I understand, I feel, I empathize. We need to think more about how words and images and symbols that constantly bombard us impact us and how we think about others, impact our ability to have empathy. Maybe we need to define success in a different way. Maybe we need to show that social awareness will lead us to empathy and spend time studying social awareness. Responsible decision-making should be the container in which we study history, perhaps, and show how good choices make a difference. Relationship skills help us relate to the other. Self-management helps us to show the benefit of self-control in ourselves. Self-awareness is reflection. Are we good people? Not based on how they define us, but how we define ourselves. Maybe the key to fighting anti-Semitism is for us to create amongst ourselves a mentally strong, healthy people who can look at other people and not feel threatened because we understand how special and how great we are. We have to develop amongst our children the opportunity to be proud of themselves, to be happy with themselves, and not to be defined by people who might hate them. And we'll end with one last thing.
And so we go to the museum. And what should we do? Weep? No. My good friends, we never try to tell the tale to make people weep. It's too easy. We didn't want pity. If we decided to tell the tale, it is because we wanted the world to be a better world. Just a better world. And learn and remember, what is our role? We must become the messengers.
Look, I'm sorry if I didn't have pithy answers that you were hoping for. But I do hope that you'll come out of this understanding that the first part of a healthy conversation is the ability to listen. We have to hear what's being said. Secondly, is we have to believe in ourselves. And we have to teach our children that we're good people and that our values are solid values. And lastly, we have to be able to try to share that in a non-threatening way with as many people as we can. Because for every diehard anti-Semite who refuses to listen, there's people who just don't know. And if we can get to them and we can teach them and show them the value of empathy and to feel for what other people have suffered so other people won't suffer, so then I think we're on a path.